Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The government has a target to reduce net migration. That's the difference between the number of people leaving and the number arriving in the UK to less than 100,000 a year. The figure currently stands at 230,000, and yesterday on the Sunday Politics, the new Immigration Minister, Caroline Nokes, was asked whether the government was still committed to that target.
Why have this target of reducing net migration to under 100,000? There are lots of cabinet ministers who would like to get rid of it. You could have left it out of the 2017 manifesto and got rid of quite a headache.
Well, you know, we had a referendum in 2016 which sent us a very clear message that people want to see that target remain. They want to see us reducing immigration to sustainable levels, and we're doing exactly that. You're right, it was there in the manifesto, so that is the direction of travel.
So we're joined in the studio now by Sundar Katwala, whose think tank British Future has been involved in conducting a series of focus groups around the country on public attitudes to immigration. Welcome to the Daily Politics. What did you find?
Well, we've been to 60 places around the country. It's the largest ever exercise in public engagement. Went to Wolverhampton last year. We're going to Berwick in the spring. So you want to get to all the different kind of places. And while we know some people are very pro and very anti-immigration, we hear that a lot online and in the media, most people are balancers. Most people think there are pressures of immigration on public services. Most people think there are gains for the economy. We've got some big decisions to make now. So how do you strike the balance between what the economy needs, what the public are confident about, how well it's managed to have a new system in the future?
But when you spoke to people across the country in the focus groups that you were doing, was the impression that they want immigration to come down significantly?
The biggest issues for people are a lack of confidence in control and management of what we're doing about immigration and integration, and a lack of public voice in how you have your say about that and who listens and how that's heard. Some people would strongly reduce immigration. Most people would say, I might reduce some things, but I wouldn't reduce other things. Almost nowhere would people reduce the number of students. Very few people would reduce the number of people doing highly skilled jobs. There's more of a division politically about whether you'd control low-skilled immigration and not reduce it very much if people are working, or whether you want to get that down quite a lot. People think we want to protect refugees, but again, they're not sure how well it works in practice, what the system's like, and how well we do integration. So it's not one size fits all.
So do you think that characterisation of the millions of people that voted leave, that actually their sole reason behind it was to bring down immigration, that was wrong?
I think it's a caricature. I think immigration was definitely important for a lot of people. Other issues like sovereignty were also important, but those people who immigration was an issue, only a minority are saying, shut the borders, still less, send them all back. Everyone agrees that the people here should stay. And then there's a debate about what does control look like. The current target has always been missed, so it hasn't worked well, but actually you can't replace something with nothing. Can we involve the public in what kinds of targets are clear and accessible and give them the kinds of controls they want? And can we deal with lots of the local impacts, which are very different everywhere, about your lived experience of has the pace of immigration been handled well? Because that didn't happen in the last 10 or 15 years.
Well, Anne-Marie Trelin, listening to that, is there any point having this target that's been repeatedly missed going forward again?
Well, no, I think you're right. The point of having a target is that you need to have something to focus on, and I think Caroline Nokes made that clear as
she did. But do you agree, bearing in mind you've missed it time and time again to bring it down to tens of thousands? Is it right to keep on?
We've got a long way to go there, but I think the key, as a Brexiteer who, spent a very large time, a lot of time last year campaigning for Brexit, absolutely the message was a level of control over immigration so that we can talk to people directly, our MPs, about how it is exactly right, as you say, that lived experience in our communities. The need for, highly skilled specialists who are, global, that isn't in question. I think it's understanding how we can support, and also key is to meet that skills gap. There is a skills gap in the UK. We mustn't be afraid to say so, and we need to work really hard investing in that. This year, the Year of the Engineer, fantastic initiative to really drive forward those skill sets.
But how do you explain that if it's about bringing back control, the government missing the target for non-EU immigration? They haven't even been able to bring that down to the levels that would have fitted that target.
Well, again, I think that fits with the skills gap question, and actually making sure that government in the round can tackle those areas. But really, by having this focus and making making sure that that is a key part of government policy going forwards. Well, yes, but I think whilst we were still in the EU, you know, the question was perhaps less focused on than it needed to be. That may well be one of the reasons why so many people chose this. The question of having control of this matter and who is here is really important to the British people.
Do you accept that the public, as Sunda says, they don't want to replace something for nothing? They want a target in terms of bringing back control. Is he right?
I think Sunda is right that people have got a much more nuanced view than is often explained, that there may be two groups of people, one that are very, very pro-immigration and one group very, very anti, but actually the bigger group of people are somewhere in the middle. And I think the government is wrong to focus on the number. And I tell you why, because the more that they miss that target and people do care about it, they will then create even more mistrust about whether they can manage immigration, and they couldn't even hit the target for non-EU migrants, as you pointed out. So I think this should be a much more nuanced conversation with the British public than a number. And the problem with a number is that it creates mistrust if you don't get that.
So
and
you
also
wouldn't have a number.
On the economy,
so you
for
wouldn't,
example.
right? So you wouldn't have a number, and
no,
you wouldn't have a target.
No, I wouldn't have a number, and I wouldn't have a target. And I would say to people, we have to manage the local impacts. We have to make sure that there are many families coming in whose children don't have English as their first language, then we need to give schools more money to cope with that. I would say that actually, and I think Sunda's done some work on this, that when it comes to lowly skilled, even within lowly skilled approach and attitude to lowly skilled workers, there are nuances. For example,
that why Leave won the referendum, do you think? Because people like you are promising to stay in the single market where there'll be no control over immigration and you don't want to target at all?
Well, I don't remember saying any of that, but...
well, you've just said you don't want to target on immigration.
No, but that's different to saying I think the government should have some control and should manage the system.
Right, so would you have a level for net migration?
I would not have a target that I would then miss year on year for 7 years in a row that people did not have confidence in.
Right,
No,
so
it's a record of failure, because you're setting yourself up for failure and you're setting yourself up for creating even more mistrust, distrust within the public.
Do you think that will lose more trust from people not having a target?
I think you've got to involve the public now in the approach we set. Actually arguing about this target now, we've got to design the whole system. That's what matters. People felt this was very important that they got to have their say. They thought it was very overdue. They found it quite cathartic. Now, are we going to say the referendum was the end and government will sort it out? Actually, one of the really interesting things in the report today is let's do this every year. Let's have a moment in Parliament, an annual immigration report. It could look like the budget. And that's a structure. We can have conversations around the country. We can say that's where they're going to go. We've heard from NHS trusts and businesses who want immigration. We've heard from people who are worried about the pace of change. Here's how we're striking the balance with the controls or with the spending. If that's so, the referendum mustn't be the end of the public's voice. Actually, let's involve the public in what those new targets should be.
Right. Would you involve the public in setting a target?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question of having, if you like, an annual report, because actually that does exactly that, which is what I think people want to do, is to make sure that they had a way to be heard. And, you know, clearly if government can find a system that works and there's a balance, that will be reflected through MPs' postbags and so on.
So if they said, actually, we'd like 150,000, for example, like Andy Street, in fact, who was your Conservative mayor, you know, would that work, saying we should have more than 100,000? Would you take that on board?
It's going to vary as we take control of, you know, all our immigration policy and how we manage this.
So why haven't you managed, though, for non-EU migration, where you do have control?
Well, but I think that's the question of actually getting a framework within the department where this is a absolutely key focus. Actually, I really like that idea of that kind of annual, you know, stamping of where government is at, you know, going forwards, because it will be ours to determine genuinely without external influences, and to actually set that out very clearly so that the public can really understand how government is thinking and how business and public sector is feeding into that system.
Sunda Katwala, thank you very much for coming in.